Hello there, you glorious and awakening wonder. It's so beautiful to be on this path with you. On the Awakening channel, we talk about spiritual enlightenment, well-being, but in a way that ain't deracinated, uprooted from other moral, collective, social obligations we have as people that live in this world. We're not participating in well-being and personal development so we can become better stand-up comedians or better accountants or better caregivers. We're doing it because we want to realise who we truly are. I had a conversation on my podcast, Under the Skin, with David Buss. He's an evolutionary psychologist. Evolutionary psychologists, obviously, as the name suggests, chart behavioural traits and how they intersect with neurology and evolution. We talked a lot about mating strategies and all those kind of things, but I wanted to talk to David Buss about social problems, for example, obesity, eating disorders, behavioural problems, and how they have likely been generated by social and economic systems like the availability of food that we're aware ain't good for us. In this part of the conversation from my podcast, Under the Skin on Luminary, if you don't subscribe to it yet, you should consider subscribing to it. We get right into that stuff, and David Buss himself said, I challenged him very well. You let me know what you think about the way that our culture affects us from an evolutionary perspective. Do you consider us to be animals that are free-ranging, animals that are in a farm, or more likely exotic animals caged in a zoo of capitalism and commerce? Stay at the end of some fantastic bits and comment below and let me know what you think of it. If you don't subscribe to this channel yet, you should subscribe right now because it's really important that as many people as possible have access to this information. What magnetic forces create the kind of structures that we live within now, where power is centralized, where people live in urban conurbations, where, from agriculture onwards, through the various revolutions of agriculture, industry and technology, the advantages to individuals, while obvious and evident, particularly in instances where there would be a financial and economic advantage to those centralized forces, the progress can easily be charted. When it comes to the subjects such as isolation, alienation, despair, drug dependency, it's clear that we are creatures now that live in a kind of captivity, in a kind of open prison. Do you ever become frustrated that we don't socially and politically enact in responsible and sensible ways the obvious findings of from your particular area of expertise?
I do. I mean, I think that one way that I would phrase it broadly before trying to get at your specific question is that all we have is our evolved psychology that evolved over several millions of years. And in the here and now, we are stuck with this evolved psychology. And in some cases, it produces bad things. And in some cases, it produces good things. And that's why I think your answer to your question has to be done on a case-by-case basis. So just for example, we evolved food preferences for fat and sugar. And so in the modern environments, though, fat and sugar are readily abundant and they're packaged into high carbohydrate foods, fast food restaurants. And so we have problems of obesity and type 2 diabetes that are really evolutionarily unprecedented. But so we have to, in some ways, control our evolved taste preference. So this is one way in which it's led us astray. Another is that I've pointed out earlier, is that we do feel more isolated, more alienated as a context because of the modern context, where despite being surrounded by thousands or millions of people, we still feel alone. In part, I'll mention one other element of that, of why we feel so alone and perhaps why depression rates have increased, is because we don't have deep friendships. So, and by that, I mean, our ancestors would have faced the trials and tribulations where you know who your true friends are, because you go through times of stress. People will save your life when you're ill or injured. And we go through fewer of these, stressful life events, which really reveal the depth of your social relationships. And we don't go through those anymore. And so I think that's one way. That's why I tell in the mating domain, which, as I said, is really my area of specialty, when people are considering a long-term mate, I urge them to go on vacation together. Take 2 weeks and go to a foreign country, put the relationship to stress tests, and that reveals information that you don't get when times are good. And so I think that the lack of tests of our true friendships and true romantic relationships is the lack of these tests is part of why we feel more alienated in the modern environment. Another thing, here's again, relevant to my area of expertise. We have pornography and internet dating are two technological advances, if you will, or two technologies that we are consuming in huge abundance. So majority of men consume pornography at some point. Sometimes men get addicted to it. And the internet dating is the major form of meeting people. We don't tend to go to bars anymore and meet people. And so this has kind of changed the whole matrix of the mating game, where, for example, with internet dating, there's this perception that there are thousands or millions of potential mates for you out there. And we experience decision paralysis because, oh, this person's doesn't meet quite, my standards on 19 variables. So I think I'm going to keep looking. And so there's this, because of this perception, there are millions of opportunities out there that also produces a decrease in commitment. And we're seeing that as well with a decrease in intimate relationships, a decrease in even sexual behavior, frequency of sexual intercourse, and decreases in marriage. So it's, and I think it's partly due to both of those factors. Pornography consumption, I think, and I'd be curious about your thoughts on this, I think takes the sexual edge off of males so that they feel less motivated to go out and have real life sexual interactions with women, where they have to actually do things like have conversations and establish a relationship and so forth. And so I think that even things like the overconsumption of pornography, and I'm not opposed to pornography in general. I mean, in some ways it produces beneficial effects, but I think it takes the edge off of males and decreases their sexual motivation to have in real life mating relationships.
Let's take, and I will move generally in the direction of your expertise, because otherwise we might as well talk about football. But like, just as we mentioned at the beginning of your answer to the previous question, the preponderance of sugar and fat, and I feel that, of course, we are evolved to value foods that would be scarce and are high in energy. But there is a reason that these foods are now abundantly available, and those reasons are economic. So, if you were trying to design a society that was beneficial to the maximum number of individuals, you would promote foods that are that we evolved in harmony with, that are beneficial to us. You wouldn't promote foods that are high in sugar and fat because obesity, diabetes, heart disease. But the reason that we do promote those foods, make those foods freely available, or not freely available, but readily available and cheaply available, is because it is profitable. And because of evolutionary psychology, we're sort of unable to discern correctly whether or not we should be eating them, because it bypasses us. I have the image, David, of evolution as a kind of river, and we as individuals float upon that river. And this is obviously, particularly relevant in your field. When I see how cats behave how male cats behave when a female cat is on heat, and a cat will travel 5 kilometers for a mating opportunity, you realize that individual cat's psychology, such as it might be, is a pretty blunt tool when faced with the tirade and deluge of evolutionary force. And I feel that I think what interests me is, how do we use our understanding to create social systems that are beneficial to us? Of course, I'm interested as an individual. I am an individual, and I'm fascinated by how we might have mating, social and sexual protocols that are kind of irrelevant, redundant, unhelpful, although I can see that monogamy and mating pairings are sort of helpful in loads and loads of ways, socially, religiously, loads of ways I can see they're beneficial. I'm interested, I suppose, in using this vast wealth of knowledge that you have accrued to implement and encourage ideas that go beyond the kind of, what do I want to say, coffee table musings of a sort of late rational, mechanical, nihilistic culture, and that's the culture that I sort of find myself in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a tough question, because there are always trade-offs. So as you mentioned with fast food industry, their goal is to make profit. And so they design products that hijack our evolved psychology, in this case, our evolved psychology of food preferences. But the same thing occurs with social media, for example. That is, we have here's another dimension, an evolved psychology that we evolved in the context of small groups that had status hierarchies, and all groups have them. Some people are up, some are down, some have high rank, some low rank, often informally, sometimes formally. But one of the critical cues to status has been the attention structure. That is, the people who are high in status are the people to whom the most people pay the most attention.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation between me and David Buss. If you did, perhaps you'll consider subscribing to Luminary and listening to the whole raft of under the skin content that's available there. Some fantastic conversations. Let me know in the comments below what you agreed with, what you disagreed with. Can we change our nature through practice, through prayer, through meditation, through psychedelics, through what? Give this video a like, subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed the video, watch either one of these two. They're equally good. And please sign up to my mailing list. I do fantastic stuff. I'm having a conversation with Gabor Mate in front of a very small audience for my podcast Under the Skin. I'm doing a fascinating live event that I only tell my mailing list about. I do Zoom calls. It's a fantastic window to another world. It's an opportunity to belong to something, to mean something, to feel connected. One click away. Stay free.